Welcome, everybody, to It's Never Too Late to Hit Reset and Start Over on Life and Love Summit. I'm Suzanne Oshima, and I'm a life and love transformational coach at Your Next Amazing Story. I'm so excited because we have a very special guest today, Michelle Rankin, and she's going to share with us how to overcome overeating, stress eating, and self sabotage. But before we jump into it, I would love to tell you a little bit about Michelle. Michelle Rankin, the curvy keto coach, helps women in their 50s shed up to a pound a day of fat, bloat, and toxins, and also overcome stress eating and self sabotage to keep off the extra weight for good. She is a wife, an adoptive mama, a mad lover of coffee, a terrible housekeeper, an avid traveler, a cancer survivor, and a huge fan of putting her hands in the dirt and her toes in the sand. Hummus and wine are her weaknesses, and she dreams of living on a sailboat in a harbor where palm trees grow. Her number one pet peeve is weight loss advice being doled out by those who have never struggled with weight themselves. Michelle discovered three keys missing from popular weight loss plans that keep women in their 50s locked in an endless battle with the same 30 to 60 pounds. She's a mad scientist when it comes to hormone balancing and leveraging the power of the subconscious mind. Combining ancient wisdom and modern science, she has developed the Diet Freedom Matrix, which has helped hundreds of women get off the roller coaster of diet insanity for good. So, welcome, Michelle. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you. That was a mouthful I gave you there.
I know, but I have to say your bio is humorous because it made me laugh. I rarely laugh during somebody's bio, but it shows you have a great sense of humor. You're full of life, and I love what you're doing. So, before we jump into how a woman could get off this roller coaster, how did you become what you're calling yourself is the curvy keto coach?
Right. Well, it's like, how far do we go back? I have struggled literally my entire life, and I'll jump forward to the last decade. We struggled with 10 years of infertility, and it culminated in a cancer diagnosis. When you look deep enough into the body, you're likely to find something you don't want to see. And I had thyroid cancer, and we were after, and I'm perfectly fine and healthy, but it was definitely a wake up call. And what I realized was I'd never spent a moment enjoying or appreciating or even in peace with the body that I live in. And I was perhaps looking at, a fatal diagnosis. And it was just a huge wake up call for me, but it wasn't the answer. It wasn't the end of my journey. It was just a real kind of stopping point in there. We ended up deciding to adopt, and it was actually on my daughter's court ceremony. We brought our babies home. They're domestic adoptions. People always have a lot of questions about that. My son is 8 and my daughter is turning 4 today. And so we brought her home from the hospital, and then her court ceremony was a couple of months later. And my dad was taking the pictures, and bless his heart, he thinks everything's beautiful. But if my mom had been taking them, she would have been deleting, the really bad ones as she went. My dad left them all. And we left the courtroom, and it's supposed to be the happiest day of my life, right? We've waited forever for these babies to come home. And I looked at the pictures and I wanted to delete every one of them, right? And it was like, how much of my life can I delete? This is real life. I cannot delete my daughter's adoption day pictures. I got to do something different myself. And I didn't want to raise her with body disorder, body image issues, weight concerns, food concerns, all the insanity that I'd been living my whole life. And I just decided then and there that I was going to take care of it. So it just happened to be, that was like December 27th or 8th. And so it was coming up on New Year's. So I leveraged, the collective consciousness. We're going to fix this for good that, goes around. And I just decided to finally listen to my instinct on what to put into my body. And so fast forward, I lost an extreme amount of weight, and I over 25 pounds, 30 pounds in the first month. And I was sort of in the public eye. I had a pretty large network marketing team, which I'd started the business to pay for 2 adoptions. And so it was really public how fast my weight loss was. And people started asking me for help. And I was like, well, everyone's struggling and I'm onto something. Maybe I should help people, right? But what I realized right away is that it's way deeper than just the diet, right? The diet is really important, but what we eat is only one part of the equation. We have to look at why we're eating and how we're eating, right? And so the first group of women that came through my sort of beta program lost insane amounts of weight, like 60 pounds in 4 months kind of weight, right? And what I realized was there's this point for all of us where self-sabotage and struggle sets in, right? So I had to go to the drawing board and I dug through medical journals and every pretty much emotional eating book out there looking for what is proven and tested, right? And I just built my program based on what's working and what works for me, right? Because I've been struggling with this for my whole life. And so fast forward, there's this beautiful place for women. So when I talk to people, they always say something like, if I could just get back to when I weighed X, right? It's like some earlier point in their life. And then the next sentence they always say is, and I thought I was fat then, right? And it's some many pounds from where they are now. And the reality is that weight, that was their healthy right weight. That was the beautiful place where if they hadn't been trying to fight it at that point, they could have settled in. And for my women, that healthy right weight is the place where we just don't struggle with food anymore. We've stepped back into our life. Weight's not our only obsession. Maybe we're dating, maybe we're looking for a better job because we're no longer held back by that, right? We're just fully living our life. And it's also the beautiful place where you can go out for a glass of wine with your girlfriends and you can go out on a date and eat real food and not worry that one bite's going to send you into the spiral of a month off or a year off and looking for the next big plan or whatever. So if we can settle into that, and I call it the happy medium, what we have is the beauty of everybody talks about, I want something sustainable and a lifestyle. Well, that's what that is. It's living at your healthy right weight, which may not be the tiny, twiggy, magazine model for most of us, especially if we've struggled our life. It's pretty good indication that that's not where we're going to end up. But if we settle into our happy medium, which for me, that's between a 10 and a 12 in jean size, right? And so that's why I'm the curvy keto coach, because that's my happy medium.
Oh, I love that story. Well, and so you answered the part about the curvy, right?
Right.
But what is keto for those of us that don't know? And I will confess, I've heard of keto in the news and all over the media, but I actually don't even know what it is.
Okay. I love this question, and I'm really glad you asked. All right. So the process of nutritional ketosis means that instead of burning carbohydrates for energy, which is like kindling, it burns fast and hot, but then you have to replenish it very quickly. The process of nutritional ketosis means that you're burning fat for energy. Now, which is a longer burning, right? This higher caloric density, 9 calories versus 4 for carbohydrates. But what really is important about this is that the keto diet comes out of the 1920s. Well, we evolved in and out of nutritional ketosis. It's a very natural body state, right? We didn't evolve in, with a convenience store on every corner. So this is a very natural state for us. Well, we can leverage that for weight loss. But here's the problem. That's going to get on my soapbox a little bit here. The diet, as most people are following it today, I call it the butter, bacon, and fat bomb approach. It comes out of the 1920s and epilepsy control. Well, travel with me in your mind for a minute to 1920, and the percentage of the population that was overweight was very little. And a ketogenic diet is to this day the only successful way to control or sort of mediate in Dilantin resistant or medication-resistant epilepsy. This is medication in the 1920s, right? And so if you think about 1920 and you think about somebody struggling with completely out of control epilepsy, clinging to their life with grand mal seizures, multiple a day, right? That person very likely didn't have a weight problem. And if they did, it was the least of their worries. The original ketogenic diet that everyone's trying to follow today for weight loss was actually designed to be as weight sparing as possible. Now, of course, when you eliminate one major food group, and when you start to think about the food you're eating and you start to pay attention to labels and you start to cook at home more instead of eating out, you're going to lose some weight. But to really truly optimize a ketogenic diet for weight loss, especially for a woman in their 50s, that makes a very big difference your age. We see younger women and men of all ages, of course, losing weight very rapidly on pretty much any diet that cleans up their eating. But for somebody that starts into the hormonal phase of their life, right, we start into pre and regular menopause, we have to really lock it down. And there's some pretty specific keys that are being completely missed on the general keto population because most people teaching it have never struggled themselves. So they're doling out advice and they're just parroting each other. And very few people know how to actually optimize a ketogenic diet for health. And one of the biggest things that we have to focus on and think about, everybody talks about cortisol, and we understand that cortisol causes belly fat and stress. One of the biggest stressors we put in our body is the food we ask it to digest, right? We eat, and the typical ketogenic diet that people are trying to follow consists of like cheese, bacon, cream cheese, and more cheese, right? And we end up with massive inflammation in the body, which sets off even more cortisol. So we have to tame this down and take it to a very simple pre-packaged food approach to it. Of course, now we have a bunch of packaged food companies jumping on the keto bandwagon because people are not buying their Twinkies and Ho-Hos anymore, right? So they're coming up with a ketoized version of them. And so we have to take it back to a very simple, I call it healthy, simple keto approach, that we calm all of the hormonal mediators. There's a number of hormonal processes in the body that actually self-propagate obesity. We have a lot of stop gaps for losing weight, a lot of resistance to losing weight if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, but we don't have anything to turn off the weight gain cycle. And a lot of what we have going on hormonally, especially some of the hormones recently discovered secreted from the fat cell themselves, actually self-propagate. So people end up feeling like they're in this out of control spiral, right? We can mediate a lot of those with a well-designed ketogenic diet. So there's your mouthful on keto.
Okay, so I know you had talked about it's not just about the food that we eat, right? It's about a number of factors. And I know you have something that's called the Diet Freedom Matrix. And so, what is that all about?
Okay, yes. So the Diet Freedom Matrix, so food matters. It really does. We first have to stabilize all the hormonal systems. So in the matrix, the first thing are hormones. And more than just the obvious, the ones that we hear about like insulin and leptin, which are important, we have to look at estrogen. It's really important because a woman who goes into menopause at some evolutionary perfect weight of, I'm 5'7", so who knows, it'd be 125 pounds or something, pre long ago weight, would come out on the other side with just a little tiny bit of a belly fat that she didn't go into menopause with. And we saw this in our grandmothers and our great grandmothers who went into menopause at healthy weights. And they fought with that little bit of belly fat for the rest of their life. That's our God-given supply of estrogen. Fat secretes estrogen. So one of the things that we have to really look at when we come into menopause with excess weight on our body is how do we help the body detoxify the estrogen out of the fat cell? So the hormonal piece is the first piece of the matrix. And then we have emotional, right?
Before you jump into emotional, can I ask you a question about detoxing the estrogen out of your body? And how do you do that? Is it through the way you eat and also pills, or what is it?
Okay. So are you asking, am I using a lot of supplements in my program? Is that what you're asking there?
Well, you had mentioned what's important is to detox the estrogen out of the belly fat, but I'm just curious how one does that, because I don't think, or maybe I'm wrong, is just eating the right foods, is that going to detox the estrogen out of your system? Or
Okay, yeah. So if you're asking the body to break down a fat cell and it has a lot of estrogen in it, your body's going to resist that big time. Why? It's not going to dump that extra hormone. Our fat cells are storing excess hormone. Not only are they creating estrogen, but they're storing excess xenoestrogens and toxins and everything we're exposed to every day. So if you ask your body to dump that into the bloodstream, i.e. to break down that fat cell without giving it all the raw materials that it actually needs to metabolize and excrete that estrogen, it's not going to do it. It's going to resist every weight loss effort you try to give it. Because why? It's not safe to dump that hormone back in the bloodstream. The reason that it's in the fat cell to begin with is to protect you from breast cancer, right? And so we can do it with very targeted nutrition. And again, a focus not on cheese and butter and bacon and fat bombs, but on micronutrients, right? That's the most underutilized part of the ketogenic diet is, yes, macronutrients matter, but micronutrients, the healing dunce, especially the Brassica family, helps to detoxify estrogen out of the fat cell. And yes, we can use a few supplements. I like to use like a powdered greens just to make sure that we're getting in a little bit of extra. It's a very low carbohydrate way of getting in a pretty dense amount of micronutrients. But the focus is really on micronutrients is the answer to your question there.
interesting. Okay. So now let's jump into the emotional part.
Okay, so it's so loaded, right? So we hear about emotional eating, stress eating, and it's like, okay, but what is it? Okay, so emotional eating is we use food to distract or soothe or avoid from emotions that we are uncomfortable allowing to flow through us. So we spend all our life believing our thoughts and ignoring our emotions. And what we should be doing is ignoring our thoughts because they're just a random generation within the brain. And we're meant to be fearful and worrisome. That's how we stayed alive in an evolutionary perspective. But our emotions, even fruit flies have emotions, right? And we spend all this time trying to avoid them and ignore them because we're afraid of the magnitude of them. Women, specifically in Western cultures, are afraid to allow themselves to feel anger and sadness, primarily in my experience. And we're much more comfortable with guilt and shame. So what do? Anger and sadness start to come through us, and we immediately eat to distract ourselves, and then we layer on guilt and shame about having just eaten and about our body. And we stay in this loop around it. And what we find and what my women find is that when we have the tools that I teach to overcome the emotional overwhelm, they're not as frightening emotion. They're already there anyway, right? They're already flowing through us. We're just not letting them express themselves. They're not as scary as we think. And once we allow those emotions to come through us and actually lean into them, they no longer drive us to eat because we don't have to avoid anything anymore. We're not afraid of them. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, yeah, I totally get it because when you resist it, then it's like your emotions are controlling you, right?
Absolutely. The same with being frustrated with your body weight. It controls you, right? We were just in Mexico this summer and we were watching the locals. So we were in Cabo and they had a pretty bad hurricane a few years ago, and it really changed the surf. It used to be really gentle. You could just walk in, and now it really rolls in, but people still swim. And so my best friend's daughter is a pretty strong swimmer, and she asked me to take her out beyond the surf. And I said, okay, let's do it. We can do this. And we got knocked over, sunglasses lost, hats, and it was like, what is wrong? All these people are swimming out there. How did they get there? What we realized was that actually as the wave came in, they were diving into the wave, right? We were trying to brace ourselves against it. And it's the same thing with emotions, leaning into them rather than trying to brace yourself and then you don't get knocked over by them.
Oh, I love that because I used to go body surfing all the time. So I totally get the concept of you need to dive under the wave. It's true. People don't realize that because otherwise, if you stand up, it knocks you over and you get
Totally.
tumbled all over the place.
You have to have that faith, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yep,
it's true.
exactly.
And of course, you have to know how to swim.
Well, right. It is very helpful. One should not be diving in the ocean, right? And that's the tools I give women are the tools to swim and to stay afloat and to not be so afraid. It's like, fearing our emotions doesn't get us anywhere because there's something that can't be avoided. And the Latin root of emotion is motere, which means to move. Emotions drive our behavior. Whether or not we allow ourselves to feel them, they still drive our behavior. So we absolutely can't avoid actually being able to process through our emotions.
That's a powerful nugget right there. So what's another part of the matrix besides the emotions?
Okay, so we have environmental, and food companies prey on this so big time. And so, if you can take a person who is not yet struggling with weight, either in childhood or in early adulthood, and you can give them an evaluation of how sensitive their brain is. I call it the HSB, the highly sensitive brain. How sensitive their brain is to the reward value of food. It has to do a lot with the dopamine pleasure centers, and when they put you can see images all over the internet where they've taken a brain on sugar and they've compared it to a brain on cocaine, and it's very, very similar where the light up is inside of the brain. And so you can take somebody and you can test for their relative reward value of food, the RVV, and determine almost unequivocally how likely they are to struggle with weight in the future based on how sensitive their brain is. Well, packaged food companies completely prey on this. So people, if you've ever, it doesn't look like you've struggled with weight. Maybe I'm making a
Oh, I have. I have.
yeah, okay.
I will actually tell you. I think it's important to share because some people think, oh, she doesn't. I have struggled with weight. And when I was younger, I used to have an eating disorder and I used to be actually an overeater.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally get how that can control your mind and the whole emotions going around that. And at one point, I was probably 15 to 20 pounds overweight, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm only 5'1". It's a lot when you're
Right.
5'1".
Well, it's your journey, right? It's not for me
Yeah.
to judge. Yeah, yeah.
But
Exactly.
in my journey, just to share, is that I was able to overcome the eating disorder. It did take a lot of inner work to do that.
Mhm.
And I let go of trying to lose the weight is I stopped weighing myself
Yes.
from about probably 20 years ago. I stopped weighing myself. I don't weigh myself at all. In fact, when I go to the doctor's office and you know how they tell you to step on the scale, I'm like, don't tell me. I don't want to know.
Right?
I know when I've gained weight, I just go by how my clothes feel. And I know when I just need to start eating better, but I don't do that strict dieting because it doesn't
Yeah.
work for me.
It doesn't work for anybody. It really doesn't. And I call my my diet the anti-diet eating plan because it's all about figuring out what makes you feel amazing and then working through your own issues you have around allowing yourself to feel amazing. Right?
Yeah.
It's what it really comes down to, making a good decision for your body. Yes, I love that. The scale, we weigh our worth, right? And that's not who we are. It's not who we are as women. Yeah.
It's so
Back to
true. And that's actually why I stopped weighing myself because I realized when I would start my day and if it was like 2 or 3 pounds over what I wanted it to be, that would set the precedence for my day. And it would be a crappy day because I'd
right.
be down in the dumps. And I know 2 to 3 pounds doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're like, I want to stay at this weight, it is, right?
Right.
And so I was like, I really don't want to live my life by what the scale says and whether it's going to be a good day or a bad day,
Right.
because
Mm-mm.
you're not going to lose 3 pounds in a day. It's just not. You're not. Right. So I
It's
didn't
giving
want to
the
live my
scale power that it
life.
shouldn't have over you, right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I let go of that.
Good for you. That's a pretty big step for a lot of people to be able to do that, right? And we can also get to the place where the information on the scale is just information, right? It's just information. And the same with how we feel. And if we end up with an evening that really sets us off emotionally or whatever, it's just information of a place to continue exploring and doing some work, right?
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to say about the environmental piece is that to explain how serious this is. So remember when cigarettes used to be available in vending machines everywhere that kids could access, right? I
Yeah.
was a child that liked to access them. Well, when the law changed and they had to pull cigarettes out of vending machines, they lost a huge amount of their market share. Guess what they did to get it back?
Oh, I have no idea what.
They purchased packaged food companies because they're masters at addicting people, right? So Philip Morris purchased Kraft. They now, if they're still owned by the same, they've changed names so that it's not as obvious of a link, right? But to think that we're not being manipulated by the environmental triggers around packaged food companies. And then I'll use that to segue into the fourth one, which is habit. And so what happens is anything repeated a few times, and especially if you're a highly intelligent woman, your brain is really good at automating things, right? This is how we can walk across the room to answer the phone without falling. We don't have to tell our legs how to walk, right? Well, what happens is if something's repeated a few times, if it has an emotional component to it, or if it involves what I call an evolutionary score. An evolutionary score, I'll kind of tell a story to explain that. I was having a conversation with a lady, and she was a hospice nurse. So of course her career was very emotional to begin with. She had a very big weight problem. And what she found most crazy making was that she couldn't pass a certain gas station. She traveled to her client's home. She didn't work in a hospice center. She couldn't pass a certain gas station. And it was driving her insane because she wouldn't even consciously see it. And her brain would start triggering for her favorite junk food in there. Well, what had happened is that she had been feeling probably a huge amount of emotion and stress around her job. The last client she saw, she probably had to go to the bathroom. She probably had a tension in her neck. She stopped at that gas station the first time. And what happens is she gets out of her car, she stretches. That's an evolutionary score. We've done something good for ourselves. She goes in, she relieves her bladder. That's an evolutionary score. And so then the next thing she does, she buys a candy bar. She raises her blood sugar. She does feel better for a brief moment in time. It absolutely works to feel better for a brief moment in time. So the part of our brain that automates things immediately goes, wow, all of it has to do with dopamine, and it backtracks the last few stimuli or input right before you had this evolutionary score. So her brain says, she really feels a lot better. Let's do that again. So guess what? That gas station then becomes associated with this relief that it gave her body. And pretty soon she can't pass it by, right? And she's wondering if she's losing her mind because her car literally pulls itself into this gas station. And what it is this is automation, the habit loop in our brain. Well, the unfortunate thing is that the same part of our brain that automates things, which is a bit more of a rudimentary, earlier evolutionary part of our brain, is not the same part of our brain that cares what we look like on Saturday night when we have a hot date. It's not the same part of our brain. So we have this cognitive dissonance or disconnect within our brain, and we have to align this unconscious programming with our conscious desires in order to keep the weight off.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. That's a great story.
I love telling it because it gives a good analogy, right? And we automate anything. The more intelligent you are, the better you are at automation. And the reason is because you're spending more of your time in your cognitive, rational brain thinking. And so we have to automate the rest of it or we tip over standing up.
Yeah.
Right?
That's so true. Now, is there any other part to the matrix, the diet freedom matrix?
Well, there's certainly nuances within all of this.
Okay.
In the essence of time here, that's probably enough of the matrix explanation. There's quite a bit within each of the pieces of the matrix has its own individual pieces to unwind. And it depends on your own cues. Like on my website, I have a quiz to figure out how highly sensitive your brain is, right? That gives you a lot of insight and understanding, but it's still only one of the four pieces that we have to work on.
Right, right. So let me ask you a question because I know you coach people on this matrix and how to change their life, right, in a healthy way. But so when you have a client that is going through this process and is making all these different changes emotionally in their environment and the food they're eating, but then they fall off the wagon where, oh my God, I ate a whole bag of M&Ms, or maybe I ate half a pie or a cake, and then they go down that rabbit hole of after they eat it, number one, they feel horrible, right?
Guilt and shame. Yep.
Yeah. And then they start to go beating themselves up. What tools do you have to help them pull themselves out of that so they don't, because sometimes, when someone does that, then they'll go into self-sabotage. Yep. Well, I messed up there, so I'm just going to mess up the whole rest of today or the week or whatever. Yep.
That's classic black and white or all or nothing thinking, right?
Yeah.
And one of the very first modules in my program is recognizing those thought traps. So when someone goes through that module, they're usually on top of the world. They're losing a pound a day of fat, bloat, and toxins, like the title of this talk is, right? And they're on top of the world. But what I ask them to do is really, and they tell themselves, I'm never going to go off this diet. It's the perfect eating plan I've been dreaming of my whole life. Actually make them sign a contract that they will go through all the rest of the program, because that, of course, we know that that's not reality, right? Thanksgiving is still going to come. A funeral is still going to happen. There's still going to be stress, right? So we have to evaluate what our common thought traps are so that we can recognize ourselves in the middle of that thought trap, right? And then what I teach people to do is actually lean into that, recognize the guilt and the shame, backtrack it, and recognize what drives cravings or the emotional eating or stress eating piece for us. For people that struggle with this, it's really only one feeling within the body. For me, all roads lead to tension in my solar plexus, right? And that tension in my solar plexus is what I eat and drink to avoid feeling. And so if we lean into what happened, it's just information, like we talked about with the scale. And I have a number of tools that people can literally use to journal their way through that, right? But to recognize at the end of the day, that happened. I still have emotional eating to work on. Can I take another step forward in the direction of the life that I value, even with all of this baggage in tow, right? Even if, and that mindset shift is huge for people, right? That subtle shift in just looking at things and just taking another step forward every single day. And people stay in my program for years and years, because once you realize how amazing your body can feel when you put the right foods in, then it just becomes working through all of these different pieces, right?
You know, it's interesting, Michelle, when you were talking about that, the visual I got was, you know, that saying, one step back and then you just take two steps forward.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And it's easier said than done in the moment. Don't get me wrong. I struggle with it myself, right? I take full thyroid replacement because I had my thyroid removed when I had cancer. And we went to Hawaii for my dad's birthday in January. And I couldn't figure out why I could not fit in the clothes that I took at the beginning of the vacation coming home. Of course, didn't have a scale there, but I was like, what is wrong? And I came home and I had taken the entirely wrong dose of thyroid. So for over 2 weeks, I was up 10 pounds. And that's pretty typical. I can gain 10 pounds in a week-long vacation. This was 2 weeks. I came back and I just watched. And so what I teach is to move into your observing brain, move out of your thinking brain, the ego that we're very attached to, move into the observing brain. And I just watched. I watched every one of these, I call them thought traps, all of them unwinding in my brain. And I was just standing back watching, going, wow, okay, so the old me would have allowed myself then to eat and drink for the next 6 months or 6 years. But the new me recognizes this is what happened. That makes perfect sense. I'm really frustrated. I'm really sad. I'm really angry about this. There we go, allowing those to flow through, right? And what can I do next, right? We could talk a whole lot about masculine and feminine energy balance, but the feminine, the empowered feminine that I teach as well, came in and said, where can we flow through this? And it just is what it is, and step back and it's all going to be okay, right? That's the part of us that says this too shall pass. And then the empowered masculine comes in and says, well, what can we do about it? And what are the next steps that we're going to take? And how are we going to unwind this? Well, you always have access to the most amazing anti-diet eating plan. Let's take another step in that direction. And it only takes about 3 days for people that is the wading into the ocean and the trust piece. But it only takes about 3 days to move back out of the blood sugar roller coaster insanity, the foggy thinking, all of that layering on itself. And in that 3 days, you have to have faith and you have to have willpower, but long-term willpower isn't a good strategy and it's not there to rely on. But it's in those 3 days that I hold their hand and I say, give me 3 days, we can right the ship. And we have to right the ship by changing the eating, changing the emotional input, and then we're able to sail forward again.
I love that. Well, this has been amazing. So, Michelle, I know you have a free gift for the ladies. So, can you tell them about it?
Sure. So I put together a downloadable, and it's called How to Optimize a Keto Diet for Insane Weight Loss at Any Age. So I go into more depth on some of the things that I touched on here with your keto question. So that's what I have for them.
Awesome. So, ladies, if you'd like to get Michelle's free gift, you can click on the link right here on the page and go get that free gift. So, thank you so much, Michelle, for imparting everybody with your wisdom about keto and just really taking back control of your life when it comes to weight and just being happy within yourself, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.